Hello everyone, and welcome to DM Tools with MaxMcCool. On today's episode of Monsters Manifested, I hope you're ready to strap yourselves in and get ready for a big one, because today we'll be covering Beholders. So, Beholders are probably, in my opinion, one of the coolest monsters developed for Dungeons & Dragons ever. It's like this wonderful hybrid fusion of horror, fantasy, and sci-fi kind of all mixed into one. It's just this like brilliant type of monster that I really, really like. And I think they're super cool, very well fleshed out, and there's just so much that as a dungeon master or as a game master that you can do with a beholder. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. The Beholder takes up pages 26, 27, and 28 of the Monster Manual. Like I said, this is going to be a pretty sizable episode, but let's start it off with some lore, some descriptive information, and we'll make our way to the stat block in hopefully short order. So let's begin. One glance at a beholder is enough to assess its foul and otherworldly nature. Aggressive, hateful, and greedy, these aberrations dismiss all other creatures as lesser beings, toying with them or destroying them as they choose. A beholder's spheroid body levitates at all times, and its great bulging eye sits above a wide, toothy maw, while the similar eye stalks that crown its body twist and turn to keep its foes in sight. When a beholder sleeps, it closes its central eye, but leaves its smaller eyes open and alert. So, a lot of information packed in those two little blocks already about beholders. They give you kind of the general geometry of a beholder. They give you the typical characteristics and personality types, I guess, if you would, sub-personality types of a beholder: aggressive, hateful, greedy, dismissing all other entities as lesser beings, using them as playthings, and feeling free to make or take whatever they choose from them. But let's continue. Xenophobic isolationists. Enemies abound, or so every beholder believes. Beholders are convinced that other creatures resent them for their brilliance and magical power, even as they dismiss those lesser creatures as crude and disgusting. Beholders always suspect others of plotting against them, even when no other creatures are around. So immediately you get another little chunk of information as to a beholder's mentality or perspective type thing. They're xenophobic, so they hate everything that isn't them, and they're isolationists, so they typically operate solo, or if they have some form of group or individual that operates in their service, it's probably a disconnected or fragmentary type of interaction. Doesn't seem like there'd be much, if any, kind of direct contact with a beholder, just due to their paranoia and thinking that everyone is out to kill them. Let's go on. The disdain a beholder has for other creatures extends to other beholders. Each beholder believes its form to be an ideal, and that any deviation from that form is a flaw in the racial purity of its kind. Beholders vary greatly in their physical forms, making conflict between them inevitable. Some beholders are protected by overlapping chitinous plates. Some have smooth hides. Some have eye stalks that writhe like tentacles, while other stalks bear crustacean-like joints. Even slight differences of coloration and hide can turn two beholders into lifelong enemies. So this is another brilliant aspect, I think, of beholders. A beholder is effectively like just this blank slate in terms of aesthetic, definitely. So you can create a beholder that looks typical and generic, like a, floating meatball with tentacles, or you can create something that's like a heavily scaled and armored type of crustacean looking, shell type creature. I feel as though beholders grant the DM the ability to create a monster or a creature that looks pretty inherently unique and something that can totally change up the tone or the expectations of the players, or at least surprise them in a way. But let's go on. Eye Tyrant. Some beholders manage to channel their xenophobic tendencies into a terrible despotism. Rather than live in isolation, the aptly named Eye Tyrants enslave those other creatures, founding and controlling vast empires. An Eye Tyrant sometimes carves out a domain within or under a major city, commanding networks of agents that operate on the master's behalf. So, very cool. This provides an alternate route, an alternate path you can take with a beholder creature by implementing an Eye Tyrant that behaves almost as though they are a high-ranking shot caller. That you can go with the isolationist, xenophobic creature that's just outwardly aggressive to all things at all times, that may have the unfortunate luck of encountering it. Or you could create a beholder that is a form of, a type of master of puppets that pulls the strings on all sorts of people or organizations or guilds or orders of operation type thing. Let's go on. Alien Layers. Because they refuse to share territory with others, most beholders withdraw to frigid hills, abandoned ruins, and deep caverns to scheme. A beholder's lair is carved out by its disintegration eye ray, emphasizing vertical passages connecting chambers stacked on top of each other. Such an environment allows a beholder to move freely, even as it prevents intruders from easily creeping about. When intruders do break in, the height of its open ceilings allows a beholder to float up and harry foes on the floor. As alien as their creator, the rooms in a beholder's lair reflect the creature's arrogance. It festoons its chambers with trophies from the battles it has won, including petrified adventurers standing frozen in their horrified final moments, pieces of other beholders, and magic items wrested from powerful foes. A beholder judges its own worth by its acquisitions, and it never willingly parts with its treasures. See, so just in that first sort of synopsis of beholders, you've been given a veritable treasure trove of information. You've been given their outward physical appearance and been given the go-ahead to create a beholder that is as custom and unique to your desires, to however you'd like it to look. You can provide it with any form of motive. You can have a beholder that essentially is just holed up in some cavern or cave somewhere or underground somewhere, just hiding out and collecting their treasures and stuff like that. Or you could have the Eye Tyrant variation, which is more of a puppet master and likes to acquire their spoils from ordering and commanding other parties or individuals or what have you to fulfill whatever gains they have, to whatever ends the beholder may desire. They even provide you with the way that beholders create their layers and what their layers look like. The beholder is, it's understandable as the beholder is a pretty legendary creature. It's probably one of the most notable and recognizable creatures in Dungeons and Dragons outside of dragons for obvious reasons. But let's continue on to a beholder's lair. We'll jump into a bit more detail with that. A beholder's central lair is typically a large, spacious cavern with high ceilings, where it can attack without fear of closing to melee range. A beholder encountered in its lair has a challenge rating of 14, which is worth 11,500 experience points. Lair actions. When fighting inside its lair, a beholder can invoke the ambient magic to take lair actions. On initiative count 20, losing initiative ties, the beholder can take one lair action to cause one of the following effects. A 50-foot square area of ground within 120 feet of the beholder becomes slimy. That area is difficult terrain until initiative count 20 on the next round. Walls within 120 feet of the beholder sprout grasping appendages until initiative count 20 on the round after next. Each creature of the beholder's choice that starts its turn within 10 feet of such a wall must succeed on a DC 15 dexterity saving throw or be grappled. Escaping requires a successful DC 15 strength, athletics, or dexterity acrobatics check. Finally, An eye opens on a solid surface within 60 feet of the beholder. One random eye ray of the beholder shoots from that eye at a target of the beholder's choice that it can see. The eye then closes and disappears. The beholder can't repeat an effect until they have all been used, and it can't use the same effect 2 rounds in a row. So that's pretty cool. It already provides you with how a beholder would effectively implement their lair as a death trap in and of itself for any unfortunate adventurers that would have the misfortune of stumbling upon its domain. Onto regional effects. A region containing a beholder's lair is warped by the creature's unnatural presence, which creates one or more of the following effects. Creatures within 1 mile of the beholder's lair sometimes feel as if they're being watched when they aren't. When the beholder sleeps, minor warps in reality occur within 1 mile of its lair and then vanish 24 hours later. Marks on cave walls might change subtly. An eerie trinket might appear where none existed before. Harmless slime might coat a statue, and so on. These effects apply only to natural surfaces and to non-magical objects that aren't on anyone's person. If the beholder dies, these effects fade over the course of 1d10 days. See, so with a beholder, again, you can have a beholder in its lair concocting whatever it is that it so desires, right? It could be trying to hoard treasure in this hidey hole, could be trying to formulate some sort of plot to take over a region or a kingdom or something like that. Could be seeking out worship, which it probably would be since it thinks it's, well, it could be because it thinks it's kind of the paramount of existence, you know, that everything is beneath it, and therefore it probably feels as though it should be revered and worshipped in some way. And you can have the area within a 1 mile proximity, right, a 1 mile radius of this layer present itself in that way, right, and present that to the players, right. It's already establishing kind of a setup of breadcrumbs and hints to the player that something is off, and it might create some intrigue or maybe some confusion with the players as to why this location or this region has become so different and warped and changed and unnatural in comparison to the surrounding area, right? So, let us move on. Death Tyrant. On rare occasions, a beholder's sleeping mind drifts to places beyond its normal madness, imagining a reality in which it exists beyond death. When such dreams take hold, a beholder can transform, its flesh sloughing away to leave a death tyrant behind. This monster possesses the cunning and much of the magic it had in life, but it is fueled by the power of undeath. A death tyrant appears as a massive naked skull with a pinpoint of red light gleaming in its hollow eye socket. With its eye stalks rotted away, 10 spectral eyes hover above the creature and glare in all directions. Deathly despot. As they did when they were beholders, death tyrants lord their power over creatures. Moreover, a beholder's ability to quash magical energy with its central eye gives way to a more sinister power in a death tyrant, which can transform former slaves and enemies into undead servants. Zombies created by a death tyrant are used and discarded as needed. They stand guard at the entrances to the death tyrant's lair or guard its treasure vaults. Acting as bait for traps or as combat fodder, zombies keep powerful enemies distracted while the death tyrant moves into position and prepares to destroy them. So you can, again, presenting another form of another flavor to the whole puppet master aspect of the beholder, and to the beholder itself, of course, in the variation of the death tyrant, which I think is another very cool thing. That they provide you with a lot of varying information or variants of a beholder already. And this is without going into all of the customizable stuff and all of the extra lore and information that's provided to you in Volos, where they really, really go into beholders. But let's continue. Armies of the Dead. A death tyrant that embraces undeath becomes an engine of destruction. Driven by a hunger for power and security, it advances against humanoid settlements, using its eye rays to destroy every creature it encounters, then building an army of undead. If left unchecked, a Death Tyrant might wipe out the population of a city in weeks, then set its undead eye on wider conquest. As each settlement falls, the Death Tyrant's zombie forces build to overwhelming numbers. Undead nature. A Death Tyrant doesn't require air, food, drink, or sleep. So yeah, as I said, a cool undead variant of the Beholder. And I really appreciate this quite a bit in that Wizards and the writers effectively took one of their most iconic monsters, and understandably that they would because it is one of their most iconic monsters, but took one of their most iconic monsters and right out of the gate, right from jump, they provided the reader, the Dungeon Master, with 3 versions of a Beholder that they could implement into their setting that could be more tailored to their setting, to their campaign, to whatever type of feel that they're trying to go for, or even to act as kind of a twist or a refreshing change of pace from a campaign or a setting that's sort of established itself to be of a certain theme or nature. Now let's continue to a Death Tyrant's lair. A Death Tyrant's lair is usually the same site it held as a Beholder, but it contains more trappings of death and decay. A Death Tyrant encountered in its lair has a challenge rating of 15 at 13,000 experience points. Lair actions. When fighting inside its lair, a Death Tyrant can invoke the ambient magic to take lair actions. On initiative count 20, losing initiative ties, the Death Tyrant can take 1 lair action to cause one of the following effects. And let me just do a quick sidebar here, just in case it's unclear. What they mean, or at least what I interpret from what they mean from the statement of on initiative count 20, losing initiative ties, what that means is effectively at the top of the round, so on initiative count 20, obviously if there are creatures or players that have an initiative of more than 20, they would go first. But in the initiative order, every round, when you would get to 20, right? So say, for example, your monk has initiative 23 and the cleric has initiative 18. So the top of the round would go monk's turn, and the monk would perform and do whatever it is they want to do. And then before the cleric goes with initiative of 18, you would pass initiative count 20, in which the Death Tyrant or the Beholder could take a lair action in between. Just a little bit of clarification for you in case you were curious as to what that meant for lair actions. Anyway, let's move on. On initiative count 20, losing initiative ties, the Death Tyrant can take 1 lair action to cause one of the following effects. An area that is a 15-foot cube within 120 feet of the Tyrant is filled with spectral eyes and tentacles. To creatures other than the Death Tyrant, that area is lightly obscured and difficult terrain until initiative count 20 on the next round. Walls sprout spectral appendages until initiative count 20 on the round after next. Any creature, including one on the ethereal plane, that is hostile to the Tyrant and starts its turn within 10 feet of a wall must succeed on a DC 17 dexterity saving throw or be grappled. Escaping requires a successful DC 17 strength in athletics or dexterity in acrobatics check. A spectral eye opens in the air at a point within 50 feet of the Tyrant. One random eye ray of the Tyrant shoots from that eye, which is considered to be an ethereal source, at a target of the Tyrant's choice. The eye then closes and disappears. The Death Tyrant can't repeat an effect until all 3 have been used, and it can't use the same effect on consecutive rounds. So, as you see here, the lair actions for the Death Tyrant are pretty similar to the lair actions of your typical Beholder or Eye Tyrant. They just have a bit more of a kind of ethereal, spectral, undead flair or flavor to them, right? They have a more undead, necrotic, ethereal patina to them, if you would. On to regional effects. A region containing a Death Tyrant's lair is warped by the creature's unnatural presence, which creates one or more of the following effects. Creatures within 1 mile of the Tyrant's lair sometimes feel as though they are being watched, even when they aren't. When a creature hostile to the Tyrant and aware of its existence finishes a long rest within 1 mile of the Tyrant's lair, roll a d20 for that creature. On a roll of 10 or lower, the creature is subjected to one random eye ray of the tyrant. If the Death Tyrant dies, those effects fade over the course of 1d10 days. Okay, that's really cool. That's a cool change of pace for the Death Tyrant, which makes sense, I suppose, because their eye stalks are not really stalks, right? They're these kind of glowing red lights that float about this giant main skull, right? This cycloptic skull. So for the regional effects of a Death Tyrant, it can actually actively attack a hostile creature when trying to prevent them from making their way to its lair, which I find really, really interesting. Now, from the lore onto the stat blocks. Before I jump into the stat block, we have a little bit of flavor text here in the book, and it reads as follows. Every beholder thinks it's the epitome of beholdering, and the only thing it fears is that it might be wrong. Written by Valkara Ironfell, a dwarven sage. Now, the beholder is a large aberration with an alignment of lawful evil. It has an armor class of 18, which is natural armor, and it has hit points that average 180 or 19d10 plus 76. Its movement speed is 0 feet, and it has a flying speed of 20 feet, in which it hovers. The beholder has a strength of 10, a dexterity of 14, a constitution of 18, an intelligence of 17, a wisdom of 15, and a charisma of 17. Its saving throws include intelligence at +8, wisdom at +7, and charisma at +8. The beholder has the skill of perception with a +12. It is immune to the prone condition. It has senses of dark vision for 120 feet and a passive perception of 22. The beholder can speak languages of deep speech and undercommon, and it has a challenge rating of 13. Unless, of course, as stated earlier, it is within its layer, in which it has a challenge rating of 14. On to the abilities, or rather, ability. Anti-magic cone. The beholder's central eye creates an area of anti-magic, as in the anti-magic field spell, in a 150-foot cone. At the start of each of its turns, the beholder decides which way the cone faces and whether the cone is active. The area works against the beholder's own eye rays. That's pretty interesting. So it basically, if a beholder sees that there's a caster, let's say in a party or something like that, and they apply their anti-magic cone and have it face the caster or casters, that's fine, as they've disabled the casters from being able to attack, but they've also disabled themselves from being able to attack said casters due to the anti-magic cone, since it will dispel or disperse their own magic that they project through their eye rays or eye stalks. Anyway, onto the actions. Bite. It is a melee weapon attack with a +5 to hit, a reach of 5 feet, and on one target. On a hit, it does an average of 14 or 4d6 piercing damage. Eye rays. The beholder shoots 3 of the following magical eye rays at random. Reroll duplicates, choosing 1 to 3 targets it can see within 120 feet of it. 1. Charm Ray. The targeted creature must succeed on a DC 16 Wisdom saving throw or be charmed by the beholder for 1 hour or until the beholder harms the creature. 2. Paralyzing Ray. The targeted creature must succeed on a DC 16 Constitution saving throw or be paralyzed for 1 minute. The target can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect on itself on a success. 3. Fear Ray. The targeted creature must succeed on a DC 16 Wisdom saving throw or be frightened for 1 minute. The target can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect on itself on a success. 4. Slowing Ray. The targeted creature must succeed on a DC 16 Dexterity saving throw. On a failed save, the target's speed is halved for 1 minute. In addition, the creature can't take reactions, and it can take either an action or a bonus action, but not both. The creature can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect on itself on a success. 5. Enervation Ray. The targeted creature must make a DC 16 Constitution saving throw, taking an average of 36 or 8d8 necrotic damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. 6. Telekinetic Ray. If the target is a creature, it must succeed on a DC 16 strength saving throw, or the beholder moves it up to 30 feet in any direction. It is restrained by the ray's telekinetic grip until the start of the beholder's next turn, or until the beholder is incapacitated. If the target is an object weighing 300 pounds or less that isn't being worn or carried, it is moved up to 30 feet in any direction. The beholder can also exert fine control on objects with this ray, such as manipulating a simple tool or opening a door or a container. 7. Sleep Ray. The targeted creature must succeed on a DC 16 wisdom saving throw or fall asleep and remain unconscious for 1 minute. The target awakens if it takes damage or another creature takes an action to wake it. This ray has no effect on constructs and undead. 8. Petrification Ray. The targeted creature must make a DC 16 dexterity saving throw. On a failed save, the creature begins to turn to stone and is restrained. It must repeat the saving throw at the end of its next turn. On a success, the effect ends. On a failure, the creature is petrified until freed by the Greater Restoration spell or other magic. 9. Disintegration Ray. If the target is a creature, it must succeed on a DC 16 dexterity saving throw or take an average of 45 or 10d8 force damage. If this damage reduces the creature to 0 hit points, its body becomes a pile of fine gray dust. If the target is a small or larger non-magical object or creation of magical force, it is disintegrated without a saving throw. If the target is a huge or larger object or creation of magical force, the ray disintegrates a 10-foot cube of it. Finally, 10. Death Ray. The targeted creature must succeed on a DC 16 death saving throw or take an average of 55 10d10 necrotic damage. The target dies if the ray reduces it to 0 hit points. That's crazy. That's a lot of spells. That's a lot of eye rays, which is understandable. And a lot of pretty harrowing ones that can turn the tide of battle and turn the tone of the adventure or the entire campaign even. But finally, let's move on to the legendary action. The beholder can take 3 legendary actions using the eye ray option below. It can take only 1 legendary action at a time and only at the end of another creature's turn. The beholder regains spent legendary actions at the start of its turn. And the 1 legendary action, obviously, is the eye ray. The beholder uses 1 random eye ray. So, effectively, you could have, in 1 round of combat, you could have a beholder cast 4 eye rays. 3 on its turn, using its eye ray action, and then a 4th, interrupting kind of another player's turn, or in between another player's turn, to cast another random eye ray. That is insane. Now, are you ready? Was that too much? I hope not, because we also have the Death Tyrant to cover. On to the Death Tyrant then. The Death Tyrant is a large undead, also with an alignment of lawful evil. It has an armor class of 19, which is also natural armor. It has average hit points of 187, or 25d10 plus 50. The Death Tyrant also has a movement speed of 0, but a flying speed of 20 feet, which is a hover. The Death Tyrant has a strength of 10, a dex of 14, a constitution of 14, an intelligence of 19, a wisdom of 15, and charisma of 19. The Death Tyrant's saving throws include strength plus 5, constitution plus 7, intelligence plus 9, wisdom plus 7, and charisma plus 9. The Death Tyrant has the skill of perception at plus 12, much like the beholder, and has immunity to the poison damage type. The Death Tyrant is also immune to the conditions of being charmed, exhaustion, paralyzed, petrified, poisoned, and prone. It has senses of dark vision for 120 feet and a passive perception of 22. The languages the Death Tyrant speaks are also deep speech and undercommon, and the Death Tyrant is a challenge rating of 14, unless, of course, the Death Tyrant is to be found within its lair, in which it has a challenge rating of 15, as stated earlier. Now, onto the ability. Negative Energy Cone. The Death Tyrant's central eye emits an invisible, magical 150-foot cone of negative energy. At the start of each of its turns, the Tyrant decides which way the cone faces and whether the cone is active. Any creature in that area can't regain hit points. Any humanoid that dies there becomes a zombie under the Tyrant's command. The dead humanoid retains its place in the initiative order and animates at the start of its next turn, provided that its body hasn't been completely destroyed. Now, as for the actions, I'm going to go through them, but I'm going to go through them just by naming them off, as the Eye Tyrant has the same eye rays and bite attack as the Beholder does. Same with the legendary actions. So the actions are Bite, which is again a melee weapon attack with a +5 to hit, a reach of 5 feet, and on one target. And on a hit, it does an average of 14 or 4d6 piercing damage. The eye rays of the Death Tyrant operate in the same way as they do for the Beholder, where the Death Tyrant shoots 3 of the following magical eye rays at random, and the DM would reroll duplicates, choosing 1 to 3 targets it can see within 120 feet of it. 1. Charm Ray, 2. Paralyzing Ray, 3. Fear Ray, 4. Slowing Ray, 5. Enervation Ray, 6. Telekinetic Ray, 7. Sleep Ray, 8. Petrification Ray, 9. Disintegration Ray, and 10. Death Ray. And as I said, the Death Tyrant also has the legendary action of Eye Ray, where it can cast 1 random Eye Ray on a turn that is not its own turn. Now, let's get into some theory crafting, or let's get into some lore crafting, because there was a lot there that we covered, and I hope you guys aren't sick of me yet, and if you're not, awesome, because this is where we get to have some fun and chew on this information and create some interesting and harrowing scenarios and encounters for our players. So, immediately, I would say that a Beholder and or an Eye Tyrant would be big bad evil guy material without a doubt. Now, if you want to use a Beholder or a Death Tyrant as the big bad evil guy for the entirety of your campaign, or for just the, let's say, second or third chapter of your campaign, or act, if you would, of your campaign, you can definitely do that as well. But if you're going to implement a Beholder or a Death Tyrant as such, I would think that you would do it in a way where the Beholder or Death Tyrant is subservient to whatever other creature it is that it is serving for some form of personal gain or something of that effect, because there is not very much in the way of reasoning or rationalization outside of that as to how or why a Beholder or Death Tyrant would willfully serve under another creature, since it sees itself as kind of the cornerstone of existence, right? Now, with that being said, you could certainly most definitely have an instance where you have some sort of evil wizard or sorcerer, or even just a warlord of some sort, some crazy warrior barbarian that has granted the Beholder life, or has spared the life of the Beholder at one point in time, or has perhaps, stated to the Beholder, like, if we work together in doing this, or in achieving whatever it is, we can both prosper for the time being. And I mean, you could use that even as a plot hook or a plot device in and of itself for your players, right? It could be that the Beholder is now trying to conscript the adventurers, is trying to conscript the players to work for it so that it can drum up some powerful allies and use the powerful allies to take on and backstab the higher up individual that they are subservient to, right? So the way I like to think of a Beholder is very much so like this kind of paranoid, like, strategist, with like somewhere in its lair, it has like one of those beautiful mind maps with like newspaper clippings and string that's like thumbtacked all over the place and connecting everything together. And so there's a lot of like plots and subplots running through the mind of the beholder and reasonings and decisions. Like no decision is made spontaneously or at a whim type thing. And you could really create and frame an entire campaign around this. You could effectively create a scenario where your players, even from level 1, the entirety of the campaign could be them trying to spare or save this region or this city or this town, the hometown they grew up in, or something like that, because the area is getting all sorts of warped up and everyone's paranoid and feels like they're being watched, and there's these strange kind of tears and twists in reality that can cause all sorts of strange things to occur. Maybe there's suddenly just like a vortex in the woods somewhere. Maybe there's like a crack in the earth where these like strange kind of alien looking creatures come out, or maybe the reality warps and creates a tear in the material plane and provides a gateway for creatures from the abyssal plane or from the Nine Hells or from the Shadowfell, or to come out and kind of cause havoc and trouble, right? Which you could use as multiple threads for adventures, right? And you could continuously use that until the players can get to the point or to the level where they can take on the beholder in its lair. Now, if you go with the xenophobic isolationist type, I would see that as maybe the most effective or viable way to frame a campaign, right? Because this beholder is constantly in hiding. It's constantly just trying to collect its own wares and its own treasures and stuff like that and increase its worth. And it's not going to go out and about if it doesn't have to. It could easily charm an individual or a group of individuals and have the individuals be essentially its worker ants and out there running, collecting artifacts or collecting trinkets or what have you, magical items, gold, stuff like that, rare ingredients or components, and have it just bring all that stuff back, maybe drop it off at the mouth of the cave or cavern, and they never actually see the beholder, right? You could do something like that. You could do something where it's like warped individuals that don't even have to be charmed by the beholder. They just worship the beholder because the beholder has been in that region or in that area or under that city or town for hundreds of years or thousands of years. And I think that that's probably the best way to implement a beholder, right? I mean, beholders, obviously you can implement them as a random encounter or, use them on a table or something like that. But I feel like a beholder is one of those types of creatures that warrants a bit more development and work into establishing their existence in the area or in the campaign setting that you're creating. You could have an instance where the players stumble upon a beholder, but I feel as though if that's the way you go about it, it's kind of doing a disservice to the creature of the beholder and kind of allowing the beholder to have like a half-hearted moment in your campaign. A beholder is the type of creature, to me at least, that can impact a party and impact a campaign in a significant way. It can straight up petrify or disintegrate or just kill your players if they're not careful. It's highly intelligent, it's highly paranoid, it's highly xenophobic, it's got a ton of information as to what it does to a region. It affects an entire region. It has this kind of strange cavernous catacomb layer, where it can have all sorts of treasures and all sorts of things. It can influence other individuals to do its bidding for it. There's so much there. There's so much juice there that you can squeeze from a beholder that I do feel honestly that to just throw it in a game as like, yeah, by the way, here's a beholder that you stumble upon in a cave somewhere. Like, that's kind of a disservice, and your players won't be expecting it, and they might get caught off guard, and you might get a wipe right there. You might get a TPK right there. Or if they've played other games and they know all about beholders and, or have at least a cursory knowledge of beholders, they're going to see a beholder and go, oh, okay, so we turn the other way and just walk out of the cave because we're not dealing with that. We're level 3. We're not dealing with a beholder. You know what I mean? So I think that a beholder as a creature or as a monster for your players to take on has to be a bit more nuanced. I think you have to kind of tease out the existence of the beholder and kind of drop breadcrumbs along the way. And yeah, it may take a while, and probably will take a while, if you give your players the opportunity to get to the level or to the point where they would be capable of taking on a beholder. So 13 or 14 for a beholder and its layer respectively, and then 14 and 15 for Death Tyrant outside and in its layer respectively. But I feel like it would be the whole thing of worth the wait. You know, I think it would be certainly worth the wait, especially if your players get the hints that you drop them and they catch on to the fact that they're going to have to go up against a beholder. Some of them, I'm sure, will be excited to go up against this challenging creature, and some of them will be dreading it. And it'll make for good tension, I think, at the table or in your game. Now, in terms of a beholder's intentions or desires, you can see that from the description, a beholder essentially sees itself, like I said, as the pinnacle of existence. Everything is beneath it, is less worthy to even exist than it itself is. So with that, you could create orders or cults that worship the beholder, that have been charmed into worshiping it, or just convinced into worshiping it, or they do just worship it, as I said. You can create a beholder that effectively has charmed, maybe it's not even a guild or an order or a cult or anything like that. Maybe the beholder has just charmed every single expeditionist and explorer that has had the unfortunate luck of stumbling upon its lair and speaking with them and interacting with them. And then they just turn them into puppets and send them off and go, okay, now you're going to find me this treasure. Now you're going to go get me the tooth or the fang of this dragon and bring it back. And the beholder doesn't really have to actively do anything outside of brainwashing these humanoid individuals and send them off on their way to perform whatever deeds that they would want, right? And that could create, as I said, a lot of, you could actually put those two together, and you can have I think that could make for a great campaign, even like up to from level 1 to 15 if you wanted to, where you had a beholder that was like charming expeditionists or other adventurers and sending them off, and while it slept, it would dream of these warps in reality, or these strange places that would then be causing these like tears and rips and kind of gateways into other planes of existence, but allowing these creatures to jump in and all of that, you know what I mean, and cause havoc on the material plane that your players have to go up against and kind of quell, try to figure out how to close these gateways or these tears in reality, and use whatever kinds of means they can. Maybe the method that they use is successful in closing those tears, but after the 1d10 days, let's say, another tear opens up and it leads to a different place, or maybe it leads to the same place, so they're kind of band-aid fixing a dam that's leaking, you know. Perhaps you can have them seek out a means to successfully and effectively close these tears in reality, and once they do, the tears in reality to those other planes cannot be reopened, which is maybe messing with the beholder's dreams, and the beholder is failing in its dreams, which could upset the beholder. And so the beholder then takes a more active approach and sends its brainwashed minions to go up against the party and try to take them out. And the party can encounter random brainwashed individuals that obviously they don't know are brainwashed, but random individuals that present themselves to the players as hostile for whatever reason. And then these brainwashed individuals have all the intelligence of whatever creature, of whatever humanoid, of whatever age and whatever experience they are, right? They just are brainwashed to see the beholder as a friend. And if they're not brainwashed, that's actually kind of all the better, because then not even dispelling the magic on them would help, if your players even knew that was something they would have to do. So I think that that's a pretty good way of implementing a beholder, in the way of setting up a scenario, an encounter where your players will have to face a beholder. Now, once you get there to the beholder, now you have to decide if the beholder is in its lair. If it's not, if you want your players to go up against a beholder at level 13, it's certainly doable, right? You just have to come up with the reasoning for why a beholder would leave its lair. Now, there's a couple of ways you could go about it. You could go about it in the way of, like, the beholder has requested the aid of someone, let's say, if you're going like the xenophobic isolationist approach, you could go, well, the beholder has brainwashed someone and sent someone, one of its minions, to go collect some form of ancient artifact or magical item, something of that nature. And they failed, and they died. So the beholder sent another, and they failed, and they died. And so on, and so on, and so on. And after X amount of people, or years, or days, weeks, months, what have you, after X amount of failures and X amount of time, the beholder goes, of course I should have known that these inferior, useless beings, poor excuses for existence, would fail in this simple task. I guess I'll have to go do it myself. And then you can do kind of a stumbling upon, right? So maybe there's a crossroads there where your players are going to check out some sort of dungeon or tomb or cave, or, some sort of ancient structure or whatever it is, cavern, volcano, what have you. And as your players are going in to take on whatever it is for whatever exploits it is that they are going there for, the beholder is also making its way there. And the final battle is them stumbling upon a beholder stumbling upon them. And you can have combat ensue there, in which you would be able to have some interesting combat, and you could have an interesting dynamic there, right? Like perhaps they both show up at the same time and they both have to take on this other evil creature, right? That it resides in this lair, or is the owner of said treasure trove, let's call it. And perhaps the beholder and them and the players work together to take out this monster. And then at the end, once it's been dispatched of, then the beholder and the players have an opportunity to interact and see what's going to go on there. See what the happening is going to be there, in terms of, is this going to become hostile? Are they going to get charmed and brainwashed and convinced to work on the behest of the beholder? Is the beholder just going to try to kill them because they're puny, useless, inferior creatures? There's a lot of avenues you can take in that way that I think would make it pretty interesting. Another way you can have a beholder outside of its lair is like just simply destroy the lair. Like it's a cavernous area, you can have that underground, you can have it in a mountain somewhere, or in a volcano, or whatever it is, right? And if you take the volcano route, for example, you use some geological effect. The volcano erupted, it created a fissure or a crack in the side of the volcano type thing, and hot magma has poured in and has destroyed the beholder's lair, right? It's kind of gone in and melted and petrified everything with the magma, and the lava has basically melted everything, and the beholder had to get out while it still could, right, to save its hide. You could do something like excavation, right? Like perhaps there's a beholder that was hiding underground under a city, and the local city workers were told to build an extension to the sewer system of the city to get towards the lake that's out of the way, or to the ocean or the sea, as a sewer system to send out all of their waste water and such. And in digging through and trying to excavate, they've destroyed sections or parts or all of the beholder's lair. And now the beholder is perhaps come out, or the beholder has come out from underground, and now that it's lost its lair, and it's causing havoc in the city or in the town. You could have a very kind of like Godzilla type thing where you got scared women and children running in the streets and freaking out, and people shouting and yelling and pointing and saying that it's a monster, and the guard can't do anything because they all get turned to stone or dust, and you can have a very kind of like big bad monster scene for your town and city. I think that those are some pretty cool ways of implementing a beholder outside of its lair. Now, for a beholder within its lair, you could just create a thing where maybe the beholder is the benefactor of the party, and they don't even know it. You know what I mean? You could have something like that where they think that it's like that the beholder is the person that's getting the party to do all sorts of things for them and acquire all sorts of goods and stuff like that, shinies for them. And the players are good. They think they're doing it for a good reason, what have you. And turns out they're not. They're in service to this strange, horrific sci-fi fantasy monster that would just as quickly bite off their heads as shake their hands if it had an arm and hand to shake with, right? Now, if you go the way of the Death Tyrant, I think it's a little bit easier to use them as a kind of act 2 climax, big bad evil guy that kind of works to the benefit of itself, but also a higher up. Because you could do something to the effect of like, you have a Death Tyrant that effectively can walk around, or well, not walk, but float around, hover around, killing anything and everything. And immediately after it, they rise up and are in service to the Death Tyrant, right? So all you would need, let's say, is, for example, to use something very stereotypical, but I think in a way that would be pretty effective regardless. Tropes exist because they're effective. You could have something like a Lich who is seeking power. Very straightforward. Seeking power, seeking an army of undead to take over and march upon the plains of the land and take over to create an empire of its own. And it can do that. You can have a Lich that has its necromantic ability and is able to raise dead and do all of that stuff, for sure. And they have armies and armies and armies of undead. But if a Lich, let's say, wants to take over the world effectively and quickly, it would be doing its best to, I would assume it, at least, it would be doing its best to outsource the raising of its soldiers, right? The raising of its army, in which you could have a Death Tyrant serve a Lich, and the order is that the Death Tyrant is to go out and find powerful creatures and kill them and raise them up as undead variants of themselves to be in service to the army of this Lich, right? Now, why would a Death Tyrant serve this Lich? Well, it could be the rising tide theory, right? Or the rising tide concept where, rising tide raises all ships. Perhaps the Death Tyrant sees the Lich as inferior and is serving the Lich because of mutual objectives that they wish to obtain and be successful in. And so the Death Tyrant is working with the Lich for the time being until it has its opportunity to strike once everything is over so that it can rule. Perhaps the Lich has some sort of grasp on the Death Tyrant, right? Perhaps it's a kind of, master-slave thing where the Lich has something on the Death Tyrant, has something over the Death Tyrant. Perhaps it's something to the effect of like the Lich read in some ancient tome of necromancy and undead magics the means or the way in which a beholder could become a Death Tyrant. So perhaps the Death Tyrant is constantly subservient to the Lich because it believes that the Lich revealed to it the way of becoming a Death Tyrant, of evolving into this other type of, this variation or variant of what it once was, right? That wouldn't change necessarily the mentality or perspective that the Death Tyrant would have from when it was a beholder, which is that it is the ultimate thing in existence and everything is beneath it. However, perhaps the Death Tyrant doesn't know or isn't sure due to its paranoid nature, right? Isn't sure and doesn't know if the Lich has any sort of magical grasp on it being a Death Tyrant, right? And perhaps it's paranoid and thinks that maybe if it finds itself under a poor light in the Lich's eyes, the Lich can just dispel the magic that turned the beholder into a Death Tyrant and just kill it or revert it back, in which the Death Tyrant would revert to a lesser version of itself, and that can't be, they can't have that, right? So you could use kind of manipulation and kind of mental manipulation and stuff like that to have a Death Tyrant that would be in service to a Lich. And right there, you basically have your general type thing, your first big bad, and then your final big bad, with that of a Lich. That's a very strong skeleton or framework for establishing a campaign from level 1 to 20, level 3, level 5, level 10. You can generate something there that is super, super compelling, I think. And I mean, I'm straying away a bit from the low level side of things when it comes to beholders and Death Tyrants and stuff like that, like encounters with them, outside of maybe them being the employer and benefactor of your party, if that's the way you want to go about it, because it's really like, there's really no point in terms of the game, because the motives, desires, layer, all of that stuff of a beholder, all of this amazing flavor and intricacy that you can generate and that is present in the books themselves of a beholder kind of falls by the wayside if you present a beholder to level 1 players or level 2 or 3, level 5, level 10 players even, right? Because they're so powerful that presenting a beholder to a lower level party like that basically results in 2 outcomes. It's either death of the players or the players flee. There really isn't much that players can do to overcome a Death Tyrant or a beholder at, I would say, any level beneath like 11 maybe, if they're really crafty. I mean, they might be able to scrape by at level 10 if the beholder isn't in its lair, but I think it would be really, really, really harrowing, really tough for the players. So I'm keeping the beholders as almost like the big bad evil guy that's going to leave an impact, an impact on the party. It's going to change things. They may lose a member or two, and if they manage to bring that member back, even better, all the better for it, or if one of the members gets petrified and they then have a quest right there where they have to go and try to restore that party member, unless the player would rather roll up a new character. And there's just a lot that you can get out of a beholder and all of the beholder subtypes. I know I only covered Death Tyrant and the Death Tyrant variation and the beholder, but this episode is getting a little long in the tooth, I'll say. And yeah, so I'm just going to leave it at that for now, and I'll cover the spectator in the next episode and all of the variant beholder types when we get into them in Volo's Guide to Monsters, which will be coming after we get through the monster manual. So we have a bit of a ways to go, but we will get there. But that's about all I got for you guys today on this episode of Monsters Manifested. I hope you guys enjoyed yourselves and had a fun time and got some information that was useful to you for creating encounters and scenarios that involve beholders and or Death Tyrants. And hopefully I didn't put you to sleep. But thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate it. And I'd like to let you guys know that I'm getting things set up so that I can have a website with my episodes on it. I'm also thinking of putting my episodes up on YouTube just to, increase the visibility and stuff like that. And also gives me the opportunity to give you guys an opportunity and an opening to leave comments and stuff like that, and thoughts and opinions, views, suggestions, desires, whatever you guys would like to see or hear about and stuff like that. And, we can have more of a two-way conversation. This can be more of a conversation, let's say, than a lecture, right? And yeah, hopefully this continues to move forward, and I can continue to make stuff that you guys enjoy listening to and hopefully can implement in your games in some way, shape, or form, even if it's just as inspiration, planting those seeds that get things going for you in creating adventures and campaigns and encounters and scenarios for your players, So with that being said, thank you all very, very much for tuning in once again. I appreciate it. And I'll see you on the next episode of Monsters Manifested, in which we'll be covering The Spectator. Until then, we'll see you all next time. Have a good day, everyone.